Good evening and welcome to Run to PB's live stream event on nutrition for runners. My name is Matt Davy and I'm a coach at Run to PB. Now alongside me as co-host tonight is another Run to PB coach and running diehard, Zach Newman. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Matty. Excited for this one, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're both so glad that all of you have made the right choice in sacrificing the viewing of the Bachelor finale tonight in favour of obviously some valuable information on nutrition that will hopefully improve your health and performance. And now we are absolutely incredibly fortunate and extremely thankful to be joined by absolute sporting and dietetics royalty tonight, an Australian representative over the 20-kilometre walk at the 2009 and 2013 World Athletics Championships, Accredited Sports Dietitian, National High Performance Nutrition Lead for Australia, for Athletics Australia, Sports Dietitian for the VIS, and in-house Sports Dietitian at Sports Dietetics Australia. I'm thrilled to welcome to the show Jessica Rothwell.
Thank you so much, guys. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I hope that it's more beneficial than The Bachelor tonight for those that are missing out.
Sorry, we've dragged you away from it, Jessica. But yeah, thank you for taking the time.
No, I'm not actually sure what Bachelor number it is. So no, all good.
Cool. No, it is great to have you on. I know a lot of runners have been really keen for this, and we've had an overwhelming response on the social media and on the event. So thank you again. Hey, Jessica, look, as a sports dietitian, and as I guess we've heard a wide range of experiences and athletes and teams that you work with, I guess are you able to share with us what a typical consult for you when you're working with athletes, I guess particularly runners, because we're all here for runners, and how does that look? And is there some common areas that you're starting to see across runners in particular?
Yeah, so I guess in, say, a private practice setting, for example, with running athletes that might come in, obviously in terms of what a sports dietitian will do, obviously understand the reason for them being there and address and identify the certain goals that they might be looking to work on. So, for example, that could be understanding how to train properly for a marathon, or simply coming in to ensure that their training nutrition is adequate to support what they are doing. We might have athletes that come in that have developed an injury or are really fatigued and just wanting to have their dietary intake looked at, assessed, to identify any gaps that could be worthwhile in terms of optimizing. Sometimes we, I guess, have referrals for athletes experiencing disordered eating or eating disorders as well, which require, obviously professional management. So, yeah, I guess there are a whole realm of different reasons. And essentially during a consultation, we'll go through kind of past medical history, injury history, understand their anthropometry and any goals that they might have there. Consider recent blood tests and if there has been low iron. We look at clinical factors too. So obviously as athletes, as well as humans, we all experience different things such as autoimmune conditions or celiac disease, things like that. So it's important that we're screening for those things. For female athletes, obviously a menstrual cycle and a regular menstrual cycle is really important. So we also look into that and then start understanding what that athlete or runner is doing from a physical training perspective. So I think as sports dietitians, it's really important that we understand what that training week looks like, or the training month, and what that individual is looking to work on or preparing towards, so that we can provide the best recommendations or tailor those to ensure that that athlete remains healthy and we're optimizing any performance goals that they might have. So within that, obviously, yeah, we go through a diet history and screen for any relevant nutrients that are obviously important, and obviously for runners, iron is one of those, as well as calcium, and look at I guess the dietary adequacy of energy. So some more, I guess, common presentations seeing more recently, particularly with some of our younger or adolescent athletes, are, I guess, a lack of energy, or just not understanding or having the knowledge or insight in terms of how to fuel their bodies when they are undergoing a rapid stage of growth and development, and the additional nutritional requirements they might need. I also see presentations for athletes that might be experiencing low energy availability, or RED-S, which is essentially a state where the body just isn't getting enough energy to support the normal physiological functions in conjunction with that individual's independent energy needs, their lifestyle, as well as the amount of training that they're doing. And yeah, things like low iron. So there are numerous things, and yeah, I think it's really beneficial for athletes and runners, particularly if they haven't had a background or much education before in nutrition, definitely to seek the support of an accredited sports dietitian that obviously works in the space. Just to enhance knowledge or address anything that might be of concern that relates to nutrition.
So you would sort of give them a plan of sort of what potential foods they should be eating at specific times of the day. Is that kind of the thing that you would, that you would go and give them when they came in to see you, and you obviously analyse their training and potentially their bloods, a stool sample, whatever it might be?
Yeah, so it obviously depends on the individual, and I guess in terms of specific meal plans, that might be indicated for some, but not others, and it really depends on what that person feels that they need, or what we feel they need. So for some, it might be, a few tweaks or suggestions that they can try to implement across their training week that could be around pre-training nutrition, recovery nutrition, and just gradually bumping up their carbohydrate intake through practical suggestions. Obviously, depending again on the athlete that we might be working with, where there's a need or a desire for more of a planned, dietary intake in conjunction with what they're doing for training, we can certainly do that. And that can be, I guess, a really helpful tool to help guide their intake and their understanding of how to fuel their body. So, yeah, I guess it depends on, each individual. In terms of working with some of our athletes and runners at the VIS, obviously because they can access us fairly readily in terms of our time there, we can provide that education a bit more gradually and certainly really work with them on specific things. So, for example, with some of our marathoners, and we've got a few that are racing over in London at the end of the month, as well as next year for Tokyo, before the games were cancelled, we were looking at how we're going to keep our endurance athletes, I guess, as cool as possible, well hydrated, well fueled, practicing all of that to making sure that, they're not succumbing to the impacts of the heat and humidity over there. So, lots of different things we can work on, but very, very much an individual kind of scenario.
Yeah, and just on that, Jess, I mean, it is like you've touched on, there is so many topics. It's a broad topic when you talk about nutrition and running. And I guess in the interest of this stream, and that we know that a lot of these areas require that personalisation against an individual. So I guess this is very much general advice, but we really wanted to get you on to explore some of the more, I guess, topical areas of discussion that all runners seem to really want to know more about. Maybe ones areas where they may have gone down some Google rabbit holes, and I guess to kind of help. And I guess one of those relates to the aspects of training and then going forward into the performance on race day. But from a fundamental point of view, maybe we just strip it back to just that core thing around the role of carbohydrates, fats, proteins, I guess, and what role they play in the diets of us as runners.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So if we start with carbohydrates, so obviously, as you've suggested, carbs, protein, and fat are our main macronutrients, which provide energy and serve different functions and roles in the body. So carbohydrates include all of our whole grain cereals and grains, things like bread, rice, pasta, barley, buckwheat, all of those types of things, noodles, as well as fruits that provide carbohydrate. And then we get some carbohydrate through dairy as well. So carbohydrates really play a significant role in energy production, and that's one of the key functions in the body. In addition to energy production in lots of our good quality whole grains, Sorry, I missed the starchy vegetables as well, such as potato, corn, sweet potato. They also provide carbohydrates, but they also provide an array of beneficial dietary fibers that are really important in terms of supporting our gut health, including vitamins B12, which play a role in energy production, non-heme iron, which is a type of iron that isn't as easily absorbed through the body, and things like iron and zinc. So carbohydrates not only, I guess, play a role in helping support our energy needs across the day and our cognitive function, but they also play a really important role in our immune function and helping prevent us from becoming sick, as well as injured through enough energy. So that's kind of the main purpose, the main role of carbohydrates. And for those that are listening and involved in endurance sports, obviously carbohydrates are really imperative to providing adequate energy to sustain performance, and certainly for high performance as well. So there's been, some recent studies looking at how much grams of carbohydrate per hour, and there's been a recent study that's looked at 120 grams per hour, which is enormous. So there's more to the story in terms of training gut with that amount of carbohydrate, but we certainly know its role in high performance. Protein. So protein foods include things like our animal products such as chicken, beef, lamb, fish, legumes, lentils. Dairy products are a great source of protein as well. So protein plays a beneficial role in muscle recovery, resynthesis and repair, as well as bone health and integrity. And protein also makes up different enzymes, as well as supports the endocrine function, so different hormones too. So protein is absolutely really important for athletes, and particularly runners with the high impact nature of the sport. And then we have fats. So healthy fats include our omega-3s that we typically get through oily fish, such as salmon, mackerel, sardines, things like that. And we also get other healthy fats through things like extra virgin olive oil, avocado, chia seeds, nuts, peanut or nut-based butters, as well as things like extra virgin olive oil. So fats are really important in terms of our immune function, in terms of neural function, and making sure that we've got adequate fat to support our endocrine system and different hormonal functions. So when we've got a good balance of all macronutrients, as well as those micronutrients that they provide, and a diverse range of food groups, we're generally staying nice and healthy and supporting our training.
Nice. And so in terms of then, because you mentioned a few like meat-based products and stuff like that for your proteins and that, but what about for those runners who are vegetarians or vegan? So what sort of important factors do they have to consider?
Yeah, so for plant-based athletes, there certainly needs to be very careful, I guess, planning in and around their dietary intake, because they're not getting some of those key micronutrients or vitamins that they would otherwise find in animal products. So they are, in particular, things like vitamin B12, iron, calcium, and just ensuring that there is adequate protein and the type of protein that can help support recovery without some of those branched chain amino acids that they would or potentially otherwise be missing out on, depending on if they're a vegetarian, including milk or eggs or things like that. So in addition to that, zinc and iodine are important as well. So it's certainly possible to be a runner and, choose plant-based foods. I guess some key considerations are that plant-based foods are often obviously very high in dietary fiber. So dietary fiber aids satiety, so it helps keep you full. So it's just important that athlete or individual knows how much they need to eat to be making sure they're getting enough energy in, rather than having their appetite suppressed, and understanding different types of protein and what sources they can achieve that from, or the potential use of a protein, a plant-based supplement as a recovery option. So in terms of some of those micronutrients, things like B12, that can be achieved through supplement, or things like nutritional yeast, which will also provide a little bit of zinc as well. In terms of iron, obviously some of those whole grain cereal products, as well as beans and legumes, will provide some iron. Actually, quite good sources of iron. However, the bioavailability or the absorption of that iron is just not as easily absorbed through the small intestine. So adding a source of vitamin C, such as lemon rind, lemon juice, tomato, capsicum, broccoli, things like that can help increase it. But for endurance-based athletes, it's often pretty difficult without oral iron supplementation. And yeah, a lot of, I guess we've seen a huge movement in terms of different plant-based products that are available now through supermarkets, whether that's faux-based meats or lots of different dairy alternatives that are now picking up the need to fortify their products with calcium too. So yeah, it's just having a good understanding of individual needs and then how to creatively put that together.
So would you, I guess, recommend like people getting their blood work done or anything like that, like on a regular basis, to make sure they're getting have adequate iron stores and things like that, B12 stores, zinc and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I guess the frequency of how often that year will obviously depend on the athlete, or if they're working under a GP or a sports physician as well. But absolutely, particularly for female athletes that have much higher iron needs, that's very, very important. And for those and previous athletes that I've seen in practice, if they have moved to a plant-based diet, they might be noticing some changes and feeling good, but all of a sudden sometimes things can catch up, and that's where some of those key micronutrients might be dropping without them realizing or knowing how to continue a nutritious diet. So yeah, it's often, if I am seeing a plant-based athlete in practice and they are presenting with fatigue and just not getting up for normal sessions that they could, bloods is something that I certainly would suggest.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So as we move more into the training phase, and again, I guess it ranges from all levels, but the fundamentals, I guess we're talking maybe 5K through to marathoners, and a lot of the viewers are from that range. I guess what springs to mind is that athletes, and me included, is that we're really keen to know more about the types of food that we should be eating on training days, and also the timing of food intake, I guess, before and after sessions. But maybe firstly talk to us about the types of foods, firstly, that we should be looking at maybe before training or including in the diet, and maybe some of the ones that we should be avoiding. I know not specifically, but some broad, guidance there would be great.
Yeah, so I think, and obviously, sorry, I didn't mention this before, but obviously with running, given the mechanical kind of jolting that's involved, there can be individuals that experience gastrointestinal or gut upsets depending on the food choice and that timing before their training session. So, and it depends too, and I understand there are some questions, for those athletes that are getting up super duper early and kind of rolling out of bed into a run. So in terms of, I guess what's important is to understand the session. So if it's a training session that's going to involve some speed endurance or reps or high intensity, it's really important, if possible, if there's that window of opportunity in the morning, to have some form of breakfast or a pre-exercise snack. That type of food generally should be rich in carbohydrate, low in dietary fiber, lower in fat, oil, spice, all of those types of things. So nice and easy to digest. And I guess the amount will really depend on the individual and their tolerance and how they typically feel, or what is enough that adequately fuels them for that session. So, for example, I know a lot of runners will comfortably tolerate, a bowl of porridge with some banana or something 2 to 3 hours prior to exercise. Others might prefer, a couple of pieces of toast with banana and honey. For those athletes that might have difficulty stomaching much food at all, it could be more of a liquid-based supplement such as an up and go energizer and a piece of fruit. So I guess it really just depends on that time frame in the morning, whether breakfast can be had or not. And for afternoon sessions, certainly an adequate lunch that provides that substantial carbohydrate, a good 3 to 4 hours, or if it's a bit greater than that, depending on that afternoon session, will be important, followed by some form of higher carbohydrate top-up snack 1 to 2 hours before that exercise session. And for some that, with busy lifestyles and running late, it might be that a banana is adequate in that half an hour before, if that's tolerated. So I guess the main message there is that sessions where there needs to be quality, there's high intensity, the predominant fuel source there is glycogen and carbohydrate, and that's the food choice that we want to position ahead of that session. For those kind of very easy morning runs that, are under an hour and where there's not necessarily enough time to eat in context of work or family, and they are performed at a very low aerobic activity, some of those are okay to just roll out of bed and do. And I guess just in saying that, if we're working with athletes that, are doing twice daily training sessions, sometimes that won't be enough. And we try to encourage them to have something before that session that's helping to contribute to their daily energy across the day, or ensuring that they're eating enough in the recovery window as well as across the day to support their needs.
So could it, I guess, impact their session if they've got to get up at 4:30 and they're probably not going to want to get up at 12 in the morning to get into a porridge and banana or something. So, but would that could potentially impact their session, or is it more looking at the recovery aspect? So for further on during the day.
Yeah, so I think, and I guess a little tip there is that if that is the case and it is a high intensity based or speed endurance interval type of session, certainly the night before, making sure that meal is carbohydrate rich, be it pasta, be it rice based, and then looking at having a bit more of a carbohydrate rich supper that could be, apple crumble or something like that with a little bit of ice cream or fruit salad and yogurt. So that's another way that you can kind of, I guess, top up those carbohydrate or those muscle glycogen stores to help prepare for that next morning session. I think if that is the situation, it's then really important that recovery nutrition is adequate and helping to cover the costs of the energy expended with a good quality type of protein as well that helps with that repair and resynthesis.
Yeah, sometimes I know an Allen snake or something or other. Is that a couple of those before a session? Is that sort of something, I guess, that could be considered? I don't know. Is that like something you would tell people to do?
Yeah, depending on the individual and that session, absolutely, that would be appropriate. Or it could be if sultanas were tolerated. A box of sultanas, they provide 30 grams of carbohydrate. So yeah, you're spot on in terms of that kind of instant source of carbohydrate. For some, it could be a gel, depending on that session too. So it's all about understanding what type of session it is, what are the demands, and being okay and in having something before that's easy to digest. So yeah, I think the your natural confectionery snakes, they provide a really good amount of carbohydrate. I think they're around 10 grams each. So yeah, it might not be a huge amount that needs to be had prior to that, just to top things up a little bit and get the most out of that session.
So there's a bit of almost trial and error for some athletes that before harder sessions to see what actually sits well, the timing and how they go. Because I know myself, I routinely have a sort of consistent window where I know when to eat, and I'm pretty monotonous about it. But I guess maybe there's a bit in that, in getting into a routine of when you eat and what you kind of eat that works for you.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, no individual's the same. And in terms of that pre-exercise meal, everybody's really different. So yeah, I would suggest trying a few different things, whether it's more whole food based, or if there's not enough time, whether it's some more of those quick acting sugars, whether it's more of a liquid based supplement that will digest a little bit more quickly. And some people might report that they feel better in more of a fasted state with a little bit of coffee. So obviously it will depend on each individual, the level of training of the athlete, age, and looking at, I guess, the entire day in the context of their caloric intake and nutritional needs.
Yeah, like speaking of routine, my routine of hydration is terrible. I sort of get to a point in the day where I'm like, oh, I haven't really drunk any water at all, and I'll just scull my drink bottle. Is that like advisable to do, or should it be sort of spaced out more regularly throughout the day?
Yeah, again, it's going to depend on the individual, but I suppose I probably would advise to space it out a bit across the day. So to try and minimize any kind of, significant thirst, or if you feel like you're moving into more of a dehydration pattern where you might be getting a bit of a headache or your concentration's a little bit off. And it's probably just, a lot easier for your gut to tolerate more of a consistent flow of liquid like you would in a marathon or half marathon, rather than a big bolus all at once. And I guess in terms of, hydration after exercise, if anyone has tried before, there might be an occasion where you look at kind of your fluid loss, where you do a pre-training weight, you do a post-training weight, and you look at how much has been lost, and then you can rehydrate after that. And in terms of that amount, it's typically 1.25 to 1.5 times the amount of weight lost. If an athlete's drinking during that, we need to take that into account. But it's a good way to help understand your own needs. But hydration is something that, and particularly through the cooler months, can be certainly something that's not as much at the forefront of mind versus summer.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes it's a bit undervalued at times. But why is it so important, I guess?
Yeah, so obviously in terms of hydration status, it supports performance. So we know that and obviously health, blood volume, all of those types of functions. So I think, typically we're made up of 60 to 70% water. So it plays a huge role in all of our physiological and bodily functions. And we know the impacts of dehydration can impact on cognitive function, concentration, perception of effort, fatigue, all of those types of things, as well as and again, it depends on context, but hydration and being adequately hydrated really helps with thermoregulation, so the ability to keep core body temperature at a normal level and to cool the body too. So, water's really important. And I guess in terms of that and, speedy or effective rehydration, milk is really great in terms of its sodium content and potassium, and the water content too, which helps with recovery with its protein as well. So it can be a really rehydrating, great recovery type of food, if that's a fruit smoothie or a milkshake or a milky Milo or something like that after training, or with water, or if somebody has quite significant sweat losses or is a bit of a salty sweater, where there might be that kind of white, sweat, sodium content on this. You know what I'm talking about? On the skin.
Yeah, I know it. I know it well.
Yeah. I know, it's not pleasant, isn't it? It's quite scratchy. The addition of some salty snacks or salty snacks with water or an electrolyte product can support that rehydration effectively as well. So,
just on that hydration after, is there a window we need to be getting this nutrition in? I know that they've talked about sort of 20, 30 minutes. Like, is there a real set window that's known from you guys?
In terms of recovery food and hydration?
Yeah, recovery food and hydration.
Yeah. Yep. So it does vary, and it depends on the individual, if they're doing single sessions or twice daily training, if we're talking about a training week, and the urgency, I guess, or immediacy to recover and help that muscle glycogen replenish. So within that hour after exercise, the muscles are most sensitive, I guess, to those amino acids through the protein or the carbohydrate in terms of restoring the glycogen. So look, I think because runners typically have quite high energy needs, to help just meet daily energy requirements, I think, trying to get something in within that hour post-activity is really beneficial. And I guess we know that with high intensity or longer endurance sessions or running in the heat, it can really suppress appetite. So for some athletes or individuals, it's about helping to educate them that their bodies have used this much energy, and therefore we kind of need to override those internal cues that we're not getting in terms of hunger or appetite, and use our knowledge to refuel and recover properly. Because I think what I notice most with some runners, and particularly on, Sunday long runs and things like that, that might be a bit more delayed, like 8 or 9 o'clock, depending on the length that they're doing, things can be pushed back in terms of meals, or, it might be kind of a brunch and then a kind of second meal maybe in dinner. So often energy intake on those days can be quite less given and compared to how much they might be spending, depending on how they're fueling that run. So yeah, I think, sorry, a bit of a long-winded story there, but the recovery window, is important. And certainly would be advocating or suggesting that a recovery snack is included, or there's certainly a bigger, if it's a morning session based breakfast.
That's interesting, like where you said about that sort of that, like a Sunday long run, you think, all right, it might be the biggest mileage run for the week, and if you do it later in the day, you probably, you might not eat much before it, and so therefore you're kind of only fitting in, your brunch and then your dinner, and you end up eating less during that day. Like that's actually really interesting, I think.
Yeah, and there's often that lag, and so some people might find that they're absolutely ravenous on Monday, which might be more of a rest day, and because the body's in a bit of catch up. So it's just important to understand that there can be that lag or delay with appetite. And I think when there is that, more of those liquid-based products are really, it can be really helpful in terms of bringing the blood flow back to the gut and helping to support that initial recovery phase and re-stimulating the appetite.
Is there like a specific sort of ratio that you'd look at for protein to carbohydrates that sort of best, I guess, works for recovery, or it's kind of like just get what you can in? Or
yeah, no, definitely. So in terms of protein, if we're looking at protein as more of an isolated recovery snack, we typically advise 0.3 to 0.4 grams per kilogram of body mass of a good quality protein. So whether that's animal based in terms of chicken or fish or things like that, or yogurt, dairy, milk, or whey protein isolate, something like that. So depending on the individual's lifestyle and obviously safe supplement use, we've got to be really mindful of protein supplements and minimizing risk of contamination and things like that. If it's a training session and it might be moving into one of the main meal times, that's where we might look at 0.4 to 0.5 grams per kilogram of protein, which typically, depending on what an individual normally eats, is really achievable. So, if there's, chicken throughout that meal, or a big can of tuna, or boiled eggs and tuna, or whatever it might be, or milk, or a fruit smoothie with milk and yogurt, or in a high protein yogurt, they'll often get enough. And in terms of those carbohydrate requirements, in that immediate recovery phase after training, we normally look at 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of carbohydrate. So often through, a well-planned, well-balanced meal, it's really easy to achieve that. So it just depends, I guess, on when that session lies.
Yeah. And then say at the end of the day, I quite often have a glass of milk. Sometimes it helps me sleep good, I don't know, but is it also something that might help with aiding in recovery? Obviously there's good proteins and stuff in the milk itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the protein in dairy-based products or those animal products is really beneficial. So in terms of, I guess, dairy-based products and certainly whey, it contains those branched-chain amino acids, isoleucine, valine, as well as leucine. And so they're kind of key in that recovery or lean muscle mass growth type of scenario. So yeah, it is really important in terms of that muscle repair as well as bone repair as well. So obviously as runners, we do a lot of bone loading activity. So that's, really important. And distributing protein foods across the day is really beneficial just to help your muscles absorb those amino acids in kind of nice, evenly distributed portions. So yeah, the kind of supper based yogurt or milk drink before bed and with the amino acid tryptophan can be really helpful in terms of sleep.
That's awesome. Just talk a bit about the training, the training, and moving, I guess, to race day and performance days. We're really dialing in on those into the diet and the intake that we have the night before. Like, I guess it does vary between, a 5K versus a marathon. So maybe if you could just give us some guidance there. But Yeah, I mean, high carbohydrate meals are often talked about, and does that increase? I know there's a bit of talk about whether that increases water weight, and could that actually lead to stitches? Maybe can you just give us a bit of a rundown on that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yep. So obviously, yeah, kind of the amount of carbohydrate before races will depend on the event. So if we start with the longer ones, with marathons, it used to be an old school thought that an athlete might need to carbohydrate deplete, so go low carbohydrate for a few days followed by high carbohydrate diet. So the literature and research has since changed, where with carbohydrate loading for our marathoners or 50k race walk style athletes or Ironman women, etc., typically 36 to 48 hours prior to, with a high carbohydrate loading diet is adequate. And with that, we look at essentially, depending on the individual, 10 to 12 grams per kilogram of body mass. So it's quite high. And with that, we plan foods that are generally low in fiber and low in FODMAP, so that the individual is able to easily absorb and get in that amount of food to ensure that their muscle glycogen's adequate, restored in conjunction with their taper, and they're ready to go. And with the low fiber, low FODMAP foods, it also helps minimize the risk of any gastrointestinal gut upsets during that marathon as well. So in terms of, I guess, moving down those from a marathon, any event that's really going to be, I think, over that 60 minutes needs to have some good planning of that carbohydrate intake the day before. So we know that muscle glycogen stores can take up to 1 to 2 days to properly restore and replenish. And in conjunction with a taper, that will be a bit more easily achieved. But certainly, and it will depend on the athlete, what they normally eat, how much carbohydrate. But prior to a race, we'd always look at increasing, and certainly that evening meal the night before, being pasta-based or being rice-based. We know that rice sits really well for athletes because it doesn't contain a lot of the prebiotic fibers that pasta does. So that's a great choice. I know some of our marathoners will have rice for breakfast. At 4:30.
Sorry, white rice or brown rice, or either?
Yeah, it'll depend on the individual, but if we're looking at reducing fiber, I would suggest white rice. Yeah. But as part of a healthy, well-balanced diet and throughout a training week, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having brown. That won't cause any gut upsets or things like that.
Yep. Sorry, I cut you off there.
No, that's fine. I think I've just lost my train of thought.
Because I always white rice. And, I was thinking, white or brown rice. I've never. I was just never too sure which one's going to be better before, say, a marathon or something.
Yeah, before a marathon or a long duration event, I'd go low fiber and go the white rice. Some people might be able to tolerate brown rice too. So again, it's worth practicing in training.
And so before, my go-to meal, I guess, before a marathon would be, I'd just load up on pasta and just have, classic Dolmio sauce, so poured over the top, and maybe some sweet potato for something a little bit different. But I wouldn't add in any meat or anything. Is that something that I guess is the right thing to do in terms of, performance for the next day?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fine, and you will naturally get some of those plant-based proteins through those whole grain cereals, such as your pasta. So sometimes individuals like some type of protein food because it helps keep them full. But if you're loading up and having really adequate portion size and feeling well satiated after that, that's absolutely fine. So protein, I guess, in that evening meal window just before a race, it's kind of nor here nor there, depending on you and your choices and what feels comfortable. In terms of, Zach, the question regarding stitches and water retention. So when we consume carbohydrate, with every 1 gram of carbohydrate that enters a cell, there's 3 grams of water that typically follows. So that's, I guess, where probably the question comes from in terms of more of that fluid or water retention. But it certainly won't play a role in any kind of stitches that I'm aware of or have heard. If anything, it'll actually help with hydration and helping minimize the risks of dehydration with that additional fluid. So it's almost a bit like hyperhydrating in a way. But yeah, it shouldn't cause any stitches.
Yeah, interesting. Now, I pretty much can't get out the door without at least a double shot of coffee. And I've used caffeine. I've tried caffeine during marathons, and I know it's obviously going to be individual dependent, but is it something that, like, I've had like a one no dose before the race, because I've heard or read or something that that it can help with fat utilization, which obviously you want to try to burn the fats early so you can conserve your glycogen. Is that like something that is I guess not something that I've just read on Instagram that I've found that might be interesting?
Yeah, so I guess there is some research in and around, I guess, caffeine being an ergogenic aid and understanding its different mechanisms, and there is some thought that it can help support some initial glycogen sparing, but in terms of the length, it's probably not that long. So from what I've read, it could be around 15 minutes or so, but and caffeine is helping potentially to stimulate the release of fatty acids through the breakdown of triglycerides and kind of suppress a bit of the carbohydrate oxidation. So I think, though, we should be thinking more about caffeine in terms of its beneficial performance effects, and I know how that can play out in terms of glycogen sparing. But if you have practiced a really kind of robust gut training carbohydrate intake plan leading into the marathon, and carbohydrate loaded properly, you should be able to certainly maintain good and adequate carbohydrate, even though your muscle glycogen's depleting, to make sure that you can sustain that performance at that high intensity. So we know that caffeine plays a role in reducing perception of effort, fatigue, neuromuscular contractions and things like that. And there's a certain amount that is beneficial for an athlete based on their body mass to have that helps support its ergogenic effects. So that's where, again, we always work with athletes and ensure that any kind of supplement that we might be using or trying is safe, and there's good evidence in that cohort or sport of athletes that has been tested, and there's some evidence behind its benefits for use. And then we can look at trialing those strategies with an athlete through training and understand what's going to be most beneficial in terms of the performance. So caffeine, it has a half-life of anywhere from probably 3 to 5 hours, 4 to 5 hours, around that range. So that's where we might work with athletes in terms of having kind of a caffeine strategy in that hour or half an hour prior to the start of the race, and then looking at a caffeinated gel early into that race, because we can kind of get that immediate effect and those caffeine levels start rising in around 15 minutes or so, but kind of that true ergogenic effect probably won't take place until 50 to 60 minutes into that continued activity. So there's a little bit of science behind it and suggestions in terms of how we would structure that into, say, a marathon plan and the amount prior to. And I guess, as you've mentioned, everyone's really different, and we know that genetics play a role in terms of caffeine metabolism. We don't know the role of female hormones and estrogen and menstrual cycle and all of those types of things. So it's just, practicing things in training and working independently with that athlete to make sure they feel great with what's proposed.
Is there like a specific amount per body weight or anything of caffeine, or that's completely individual dependent as well, like on how well they absorb it? And
there certainly is protocols and good evidence that we would use based on milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body mass. Typically that sits between, and I guess I just want to disclose, I don't want to make any suggestions that people go and try at home unsafely. Caffeine can be really dangerous. So, and certainly with things like no-dose, they have 100 milligrams of caffeine, which is a high amount, or, equivalent to double strength coffee, things like that. But there can certainly be overdoses with caffeine if people are taking unsafe amounts. And look, a lot of the time that would be through misuse of tablets and not knowing how much, or thinking that more is better when it's actually not, or through things like pre-workouts and different multi-ingredient supplements that have an enormous amount. Sorry, just wanted to throw that in there. But typically, in terms of the beneficial amount, we look at 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body mass. Previously, they thought it might be a bit higher, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of beneficial performance effects over 9 milligrams per kilogram. Across racing, that's where we might look at more of that 1 to 3 milligrams per kilogram. So ensuring that we kind of don't move over that, 6 milligram threshold, depending on where we're working with across the duration that that athlete's racing or running.
Awesome. Thanks.
Jess, you mentioned caffeinated gels, and obviously gels have really grown in popularity, and people have really, started to use them, I guess, even in training, but particularly in races. And I guess I want to talk about race day hydration and how much we should be drinking even right up until before the race starts, but more so during the race, taking on, with the water stations, taking gels with them, and then, I guess how we consume them as well, whether it's with water or should we be taking them with sports drinks. So if you can maybe enlighten us on a few of those aspects.
Yeah, sure. So I guess in terms of that pre-training meal and hydration, typically we look to advise 1 to 4 grams per kilogram of carbohydrate. And again, it could be really simply like, you toast and your banana. Some people might like to have some Powerade or Gatorade during that kind of pre-race breakfast 2 to 3 hours before, or a gel as well as their caffeine. So those are kind of readily digested. And in terms of that amount of fluid or hydration, typically would suggest anywhere from 5 to 10 mils per kilogram of body mass, and making sure that that individual, I guess, is coming into that race day well hydrated. So not already being in a dehydrated state, so they're not feeling that they have to guzzle down heaps and feel very uncomfortable. Some individuals, and depending on the climate that they might be racing in, might benefit from an electrolyte within that water prior to, and often that is found in sports drinks. And so that will just help the fluid shift from, I guess, the external cell into the internal, so inside and out of the cell. And when we look at, I guess, carbohydrate or fluid intake during racing, I guess there are a few different factors, and it's going to depend on the intensity that somebody is racing at, and in terms of their sweat losses, naturally, whether they're a salty sweater or not, and that can often be even dictated by the meal that they have, say, the night before, in terms of those salt losses, heat adaptation, and how well someone is acclimatized to the heat can dictate sweat sodium losses as well. So I guess typically across a marathon, for an athlete, if we can aim to minimize at least 50% of their losses, or provide at least 50% of what they will lose, knowing that through those aid stations, it can be pretty challenging to get down, a good bolus worth of fluid when you're on the run and just wanting to perform and there's people everywhere. But I think if particularly in warm conditions, if individuals can, if there's not otherwise a personalised aid station, at each opportunity try to grab something. That's really important, and be practicing that in training as well. Often, I guess, with taking a gel, often gels will contain a certain amount of sodium. It will be variable. But the suggestion to have water with that will be to help support that fluid shift and across the cell. Compared to sports drink, would be totally appropriate, and it would just depend on that individual's tolerance of that amount of carbohydrate together. And again, it comes back to what that athlete has tried previously in training leading into that event. So we know typically that 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour has been suggested. We know that can be as high as 90 grams now with different products, and can talk to that a little bit if you want in terms of the Morton and the hydrogel. But yeah, in kind of those longer duration events, and certainly kicking over, 2.5 hours, that's where we want to can have products that have different sugars in it that kind of travel through the cell in a different manner, so that we can absorb that carbohydrate and not have gut effects. And that's what we need to practice in training.
So that sort of different type of sugars, they would be able to, like, you don't be able to absorb a certain amount of one sugar and a certain amount of another sugar, not like they're kind of separate. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So glucose, it's up to around 60 grams. That is kind of that threshold before things, I guess, are saturated. And so, it might be that is just what the athlete can kind of tolerate across the race. But if we look at, say, a gel that has like a glucose fructose combination in the correct ratio, that's where that fructose or other type of sugar can travel down a different pathway and provide that higher carbohydrate. So, multiple carbohydrate transporters.
Yeah, because I know, like, some gels, like they say they've got this much amount of fructose, this much amount of glucose, and obviously, because you can absorb both of them, and that one's not going to cancel out the other in terms of the amount you can absorb.
No. Yeah, that's right. So, I think with all of those things, it's just definitely worth making sure that these strategies and different products are trialed in training prior to use in racing.
Yep. Very good point.
Maddie, we had a few questions through the week over our social media channels. Do you want to kick off? I think Tim Smith, one of our Run to BB athletes, had one.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Tim wrote in and he had a question about what approach could the average runner take to safely lose some excess weight / change body composition whilst ensuring the right amount of nutrition to maintain training levels and performance?
Yeah, so great question, Tim, and thanks for your question. So I guess in terms of safe body composition management and understanding that, I guess we've first of all just got to be really careful with understanding kind of implications of that, as well as who we're working with, just in terms of minimizing any risk of disordered eating or eating disorders that can occur with changes to body image or trying to change it. Body composition and trying to change it. So it's great in terms of asking how to safely do that. So in terms of who we're working with, and often, even through a private practice setting, have clients that come in and that is one of their goals. And quite often I find that they're just not fueling their bodies with enough of what they need to actually enable the metabolism to provide enough energy to help support those changes or the development of lean muscle mass. So that's something that I think is definitely really important to understand and make sure, first of all, that person is fueling adequately to support any kind of changes. Because if they are, often they can work harder in training and through that, it can result in greater caloric expenditure. So I guess other more, considered safe strategies that we might be able to work with someone on is in and around periodized nutrition and how we support their training sessions with adequate carbohydrate, or if it's a very easy session that might not require as much carbohydrate, it might be that they can do that in not a high carbohydrate state, but essentially in terms of, kind of that fasted exercise versus not, it will really depend on the total amount of energy that person is in across the day. And to change composition, it's about an energy deficit. So with that, we've got to be really careful and making sure that we're preserving lean muscle mass. So we don't want that to break down and lose too much of that, because that's what really drives, obviously, strength, functionality, and supports the metabolism. So I guess there's not really a specific answer. It will really depend on the individual and what type of training they're doing, the age, ability, and then how we could look at planning that. And it might be that, some of their food choices could be changed, through increasing dietary fiber and their fruit and veg intake, and making sure that they've got that good protein distribution across the day. So rather than thinking of a restrictive diet or cutting out foods or things like that, looking at ways to optimize the nutritional intake with good quality foods and how we can support them across the day.
Now, I've got another question here. We've got Sam Robley. He's on YouTube, and he's I'll put it up here, and it's got for females training and racing and through their cycle, are there more carbs, more water, or higher proteins required during pre-cycle, during, and immediately post? This is just quite a topical one that you could maybe go into briefly for us.
Yeah, so great question, and it has been and it is a really topical area at the moment. And actually, just I don't know if I'm allowed to plug anything, but SDA. Sports
We're plugging our
yes, you are. I should have worn something. No, no, it's good. I like those t-shirts. They're cool. But Sports Dietitians Australia, on this very topic, as well as some other female athlete health-based performance issues, are running a female athlete symposium, or female athlete health symposium, and it is currently open to coaches, as well as doctors and sports medicine type of people. So hopefully we will be running one for athletes down the track. I'll try and provide kind of some links so that can be open for you guys to view. But recently there was a couple of great papers released from researchers over in the UK in and around the, impacts of menstrual cycle on performance, as well as the impacts of the oral contraceptive pill on performance. And look, largely there hasn't been enough research or well-constructed research done within our female athletes to really make robust suggestions in and around changing training or increasing certain macronutrients across their cycle. So the main recommendation is that, for the female athlete, one, making sure that they do have good regular menstrual function and they kind of know what is a regular menstrual cycle. Things like polycystic ovaries or syndrome or endometriosis are ruled out if there is some form of irregularity or very heavy periods, and ensuring there's adequate energy availability to support that regularity. And so obviously, the degree of, premenstrual syndrome type symptoms will vary depending on each individual, as well as those different kind of cravings and things like that across the menstrual cycle. So I think that's where it's, as a coach, it's understanding your athlete and how they're feeling, and if there is the need to tailor or change a session because of how someone's feeling on that certain day, it's probably just worthwhile doing it and listening to those symptoms. But yes, at the moment we don't have any kind of set concrete guidelines that we would recommend in terms of changing nutrition significantly, or trying to alter fluid retention. That's just a natural response of those hormones. We're going to look forward to learning a lot more. So it's a really interesting space.
Sure.
Yeah,
Maddie, we've got time for two more questions. Have you got on there, Maddie?
Yeah, do you want to go with Luke Milko Millard, another Run to PB athlete from the new home of distance running out in Bendigo. What are some healthy snacks you would recommend to substitute for a sweet tooth?
Oh, okay. Well, look, I wouldn't disregard having the odd sweet treat or whatever you might like to call it every now and then. That's totally okay. And sometimes for athletes with really high energy needs, it's those things that can help just, help complete their total carbohydrate intake across the day. But in terms of alternatives that might satisfy a sweet tooth, I know fruit probably sounds pretty boring, but fruit is obviously a natural source of sugar. Or even if it's, something like trail mix, which has, different forms of dried fruit, might have a little bit of dark chocolate in it and some nuts and seeds. I think energy balls that, have been quite popular of late, and you probably see flashing all over your social media channels through different influencers and things like that. They contain often dates and nuts and good quality ingredients that can satisfy, that sweet craving. Even something like, a fruit flavored yogurt or, some Milo or some cocoa in your milk, is another good option. And, if anecdotally, been for a run, or you are craving something carbohydrate based, even a little bit of cordial in some sparkling mineral water, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that too, if that's just hitting that spot. So yeah, there's other things like different fruit or muesli slices that you could make up, homemade fruit muffins. So a whole range of things depending on what could be made at home or potentially bought. And I guess another point there to add is if you're a runner that is often craving lots of sweet foods all the time, it's probably an indication that you need to boost your good quality carbohydrates across the day, because that's what your body's really singing out for.
Yeah, I know whenever I get the trail mix packet, I always pull out the dark choc bits first and then leave everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there's nothing wrong with a bit of chocky. Definitely not.
Hey, a topic that comes up around is quite often is about fasted training, and we had a question here from Mark and Mark Tilke. He said, "What are your thoughts on fasted training? Are there any benefits?"
Yep. So it will depend on the session and what the goals of the session are for that athlete. So, and I guess in terms of the context of fasted training and what is looking to be achieved. So if it is a change in body composition, as kind of I was alluding to earlier, unless there's really kind of a total energy deficit across the day, there will be a greater percent of fatty acids that are used in that fasted training, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be a greater caloric loss depending on the rest of the food that individual eats across the day. And for some individuals, depending on that training session, without carbohydrate or depending on what they've had the night before, their ability to work hard, to train hard, to go for longer, etc., might be impaired, and therefore they might not burn as much energy. So that's kind of one side of the story. And I guess in terms of some other beneficial effects of fasted training can be some greater training adaptation responses in terms of mitochondrial density and things like that at a cellular level. So yeah, it really does depend on level of athlete or individual that we're working with and those specific goals to make sure we have that fine balance between training adaptations, health, and total energy requirements.
Fantastic. You've been so generous with your time, and we've just ticked over the hour mark. So we're really thankful for you for jumping on this live stream. And I know a lot of the runners, including myself, have got a great deal out of this. And I know we've jumped around at quite a few topics. So I hope a lot of others, runners like myself, have got something out of this. Just really wanted to thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge. If people want to get in touch with you and they want to, maybe book in and see you, take your nutrition to the next level, you're out at Olympic Park Sports Medicine Centre in Melbourne, and obviously in the COVID times, you're probably doing some telehealth as well. So you can book online. We'll put the links in this stream afterwards. But yeah, for sure, thank you for coming on. It's been fantastic. Yeah, and I guess for all the runners out there, stay tuned for more live stream and events that Runs PB's got on planned. But yeah, for now, thanks for everyone for tuning in, and stay safe and keep well, and enjoy your running and your nutrition now with your new tips and advice.
Yeah, thanks, Eka. And if anyone needs more information, again, I don't mean to plug, but Sports Dietitians Australia, there's a range of resources in and around different sports and, pre-exercise, fueling, hydrate, all of those sorts of things. So we've got some great fact sheets and recipes. So yeah, they're all free. So head to the website.
We'll include all those in the some links to Sports Dietitian. So yeah, great. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.